many of you have probably seen, the Yamaha R1 is going track only in Europe. This news came across our desks a couple weeks ago, and it got us thinking about the state of the sport bike market.
Yeah, so we've got a press release that Yamaha put out, and we're going to give you all that info, tell you exactly what Yamaha said, what's going to happen to the R1, kind of relate it to some other things that have already happened in the sport bike world in the past couple of years, and yeah, talk about what the future of sport bikes might look like in the next few years.
Yeah, what's going on here, it's worth saying, is nothing new. There's been a pretty substantial and noticeable trend for a number of years where inline four-cylinder sport bikes are kind of going extinct. This has been happening for a while, and we're not saying that this is something new, but we really want to talk about where we're at in this process right now, because as time goes on, things continue to change, and certainly the R1 moving toward being a track-only vehicle in Europe is a big change for one of the biggest players in the whole sport bike market.
Definitely. And we can look at what happened just a few years ago with the R6 and kind of get an idea that the same thing is happening here. So back a few years ago, Yamaha basically discontinued the R6 for similar reasons with emission standards. And they continued to sell it as a track-only or race-only model. So it wasn't street legal. It wasn't being sold with any sort of street certifications. This was for race teams and track day enthusiasts to purchase a bike and get it out there on the racetrack. For the street, Yamaha introduced the R7, which we've done tons of videos on, but very similar looking bike to the R6, but as far as, how it's made and what's powering it, completely different.
Yeah, it's a controversial change-up for a lot of people from the R6 to the R7 because horsepower figures are obviously very different. The R7 doesn't have nearly the same peak horsepower, and it's also just a very different experience to ride. That being said, there are some advantages to the parallel twin in the R7. For one, cost, because building an inline four-cylinder engine is an expensive thing to do. There's a lot of components, a lot of moving parts, in addition to the fact that it's difficult to get those inline four-cylinder engines through these emission standards. So the R7 simplifies things, and then the other advantage to a parallel twin, for one, packaging, and you've got low-end torque, which if you're street riding, that low-end torque is really nice. If you're looking for a track bike, certainly the R6 would be something that you would miss.
Yeah, and you can see that at the racetrack still. I mean, the R7's been out for, almost 4 years now, and I don't see nearly as many R7s at the racetrack as I do the R6. But then you go into downtown Boulder, and I probably see 4 R7s on the street now for every one R6 I see. So yeah, the parallel twin engine configuration gives you much better low-end torque. It's much better for pulling off of stoplights and stop signs and getting yourself out of the way of traffic, whereas the R6, it's a really fun, high-revving, screaming engine, but using all that on the street can be problematic.
And the other interesting thing to think about here is there have been rumors for a while about an R9, potentially the CP3 engine that we see in the MT09 or the XSR 900. That motor could potentially make its way into a replacement for the R1. So seeing a similar transition from the R6 to the R7, where you dropped from that inline four to a parallel twin, maybe the same thing is going to happen to that CP4 engine in the R1, and they'll transition to a full-fairing sport bike with a CP3.
Yeah, and we might have some timing on when that could actually happen, and we are going to get to that in one sec, but I want to read to you what Yamaha actually officially came out and said about the R1, because this gives us a lot of information to go off of here. So this might take a sec, but let me let you know what Yamaha actually said about this, coming from the manufacturer themselves. So they say Yamaha remains fully committed to racing the R1 in the premier production race classes worldwide, including FIM Superbike and Endurance World Championships. The commitment also extends to supporting teams and customers who race Yamaha's flagship Supersport model or utilize it as the ultimate track tool. So they're coming out and saying, look, we know the R1 is one of the most popular race bikes out there. People love racing these things, and that's not going away quite yet. But then they go on to say that global production of the R1 will continue in the future, and so will the development program that has seen this bike secure world titles in both World Superbike and EWC. So they're still developing parts for this bike. They're still dumping money into the development of this race bike. So they said that starting in 2025 and onward, considering the challenge of meeting the Euro 5 plus homologation requirements, in Europe, the R1 will be made available with specifications aimed exclusively at track use, as was done previously with the R6.
So it's not an explicit statement related to the market here in the US, but really the writing is on the wall. If that's what's going on with the R1 in Europe, we can expect that it's going to go a similar direction here in the States. And so far in this video, we've talked all about Yamaha, but it's really not just Yamaha that's moving in this direction as far as inline four-cylinder sport bikes go. If you look at Suzuki's lineup, the Gixxer 600 and 750 really haven't had a notable update since 2011, and even the Gixxer 1000 since 2017. And they used to update that bike every 2-3 years, and 2017 was a lot more than 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, that bike is starting to feel a little bit old, and yeah, I'm not sure that we're going to see another update to that bike. They'll, if I had to guess, continue selling it as long as they can and as long as it makes sense to, and then probably axe it for something new, like we expect Yamaha to do as well.
Yeah, well, and you also saw that in 2022, at least in Japan and EU markets, they're not doing the Gixxer 1000 anymore, right?
Yeah, so a lot of places you can't even buy the Gixxer 1000 anymore. And that's kind of a similar story to the Honda as well. A lot of this stuff is true for one part of the world, and then you go across seas and, you know, it's a totally different story. But CBR 600RR, so still a bike you can buy in most parts of the world, but if you buy it here in the United States, you're getting the old model that you could have bought brand new in 2019, whereas if you buy it in Japan, Japan gets the all-new CBR 600RR that has tons of updates and looks completely different. So yeah, it's depending on where you are in the world, you see different bikes, and that all comes down to where they're allowed to sell these things because of emission standards.
Now, clearly the inline four-cylinder bikes that have suffered the most are the middleweight inline four-cylinder bikes. They seem to be the first ones to go and transition over to parallel twins mostly, and that kind of makes sense because a middleweight inline four-cylinder is not going to have a ton of torque, which is going to limit how nice it is to ride on the street. Of course, that's all matters of preference, but if you transition from a 600 or a 700cc inline four to a parallel twin, you are going to have a lot more torque and a lot lower down. That being said, leader bikes, those are big enough engines that you'll still have a good amount of torque even at lower RPM, and then even more power when you wring them out. So they haven't quite yet died out the same way that the middleweight four-cylinder bikes seem to be dying out, but when it comes to the market for the leader bikes, it's definitely still not what it used to be. The CBR 1000 and ZX10RR, they're still getting incremental updates, but it doesn't quite seem to be as much of a focus as it used to be.
No, that's definitely true, and you can tell that just by the number of these you see on the road. Like, we definitely passed the heyday of, you know, fully fared sport bikes, and that was a time when the two of us weren't even, you know, we weren't riding yet.
Yeah.
When these were really at the peak, and you saw new models coming out just about every year from one of the manufacturers. We're long past those days, and a lot of it has to do with cost. People, new riders these days want really affordable bikes. A lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of people realize that low displacement bikes are just as much fun as big bikes. Mini bikes are a huge craze right now. And retro styling is in. There's a ton of people that are going for the round headlight, me included. I bought an XSR 900 last year. So, you know, styling trends change as the decades move on, and we're definitely in a phase right now where people like low cost, low displacement, and retro styled things, and that is just polar opposite of what an R1 or any other leader bike is like.
But that being said, it's not all doom and gloom. And a lot of times when you look out there and you do some research about exactly this topic we're discussing, about the state of the sport bike market and of inline four-cylinder sport bikes, a lot of people talk about it like they will disappear completely. And that just doesn't ring true because there will always be a market for these kinds of bikes and there will always be some options out there. Examples, Kawasaki just coming out with the ZX4RR. So that is a brand new motorcycle, brand new engine that's coming out. And it's not even a liter bike. This is a smaller displacement inline 4-cylinder that's brand new that came out. And that's a really cool thing because that's something that's very hard to find these days. It almost doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and Kawasaki coming out with a bike like that, hopefully they sell a ton of them because that's going to force the other manufacturers to jump into that space and come out with something similar. Right now, Kawasaki's the only one with a high revving 400cc engine, which was popular way back in the day. But if it takes off, we're going to start seeing a bunch more brands come out with similar bikes.
And even if it doesn't take off, there's at least one option out there on the market because there is a market for at least one of the manufacturers, theoretically, to be building a bike of that sort. And then you also went on an event not too long ago for a new ZX6R.
Exactly, yeah. Went on the ZX6R launched last year, which if you're buying a brand new 600, that's probably the one to get because it's the one that's still getting updates, new tech package, new styling. So yeah, you have your very small displacement bike like the Ninja ZX4RR we just talked about if you want something real small. Again, sticking with the Cowie, going up to the middleweight, you have the 600. But then look at BMW, still making very drastic changes to the S1000 or the M1000 that was just released in 2021. So no matter what size of inline 4 fully fared sport bike you want to go with, there are new options out there. It's just not as many as before.
And if you look at some of these bikes that we're talking about now, from the ZX4RR to the S1000, they are expensive. They have competition in the same category of displacement that are a lot less expensive than those particular bikes. And that's just the price that you're going to pay if you want a cutting edge, newly updated inline 4-cylinder bike. It's going to cost money. That's part of the reason that this is happening, what we're talking about. It's cost. That drives people away from it, and that drives manufacturers away from it. But again, it is important to note that there will be options out there if you're willing to spend the money and what you really want is a cutting-edge inline 4-cylinder bike. There's still brands that are out there making those bikes.
Yeah, so there's pretty much all the info we have on this right now. We do know that the Euro 5 rating that the current R1 has is good through 2028. So Yamaha's got some time if they're gonna, maybe make an all-new R1 that does meet emission standards, or this R9 that's probably a lot more likely. They do have some time before they need to figure that out, and until then, the R1 as a street bike will probably continue to be sold here in the US for at least another couple of years. And yeah, we'll have this race-only version until we have an all-new bike, hopefully, from Yamaha.
Yeah, and then any information on the R9?
No information on the R9 yet. It's all rumors and speculation, but as soon as we have any info on it, we'll keep you posted on that. And that's a bike I'm stoked for because if you know TFL Bike and you've been watching, I love fully fared sport bikes, and I've owned
the CP3.
I've owned 3 CP3s now, so I really like that motor.
Both the updated CP3 and the old one.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if that happens, just like the R7, that will be a super controversial bike when it comes out. Not everyone is going to be stoked that they're putting a CP3.
The R1 is a beloved motorcycle, as it should be. It is a spectacular engine. Sounds incredible. It's one of the best sounding bikes on the market, period.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that, not all good things can last forever.
Yeah, that's very true. So I kind of want to know your thoughts. Take, whatever fully fared sport bike is on the market right now. What engine would you pop into that to make your new modern sport bike? So R9, which is an R1 with a CP3 in it, is basically the option that the internet is saying and we're giving you, but I want to hear your creativity and see what other bikes you can come up with down in the comments below.
Yeah, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next.